Hi there, kids. Today's story is called A Trip to Town. The last story we read about living in the country during colonial times. Do you remember the different chores that had to be done by the family members? Which job sounded the most difficult or complicated? Making cheese or butter, making bread, sewing clothes, picking cotton, shearing sheep? Remember that people who lived in the country sometimes traveled to towns to pay experts, called tradespeople, to do some of this work for them, or to make some of their work easier to do. Tradespeople became experts in their jobs so that other people didn't have to do these jobs as often at home. Today, we still rely on the help of workers who become experts at their jobs so that they can help us do things we can't do by ourselves. Some of today's workers work with their hands to make things using specialized tools and knowledge, just like colonial tradespeople, like a baker or a construction worker. After today's story, you will be able to identify reasons why people who lived in the country traveled to town, and you will be able to compare and contrast jobs today and jobs in colonial towns. Let's go over a vocabulary first. Our first word is everyday. Everyday means ordinary, something that happens nearly every single day. For example, on a farm, milking the cows is an everyday event. Our next word is rare. Rare means something special, something unusual that only happens every once in a while. For example, it was a rare treat for my dad to take me to the movies. Now, I want to start our story today. It's called A Trip to Town. We're going to hear about the different types of tradespeople that lived in colonial towns long ago. Imagine you lived in the country long ago and were preparing to visit the nearest town. A trip to town was not an everyday event. 300 years ago, there were no cars or trains. Your parents would have taken you by horse or wagon. And the going was slow because you wouldn't have wanted to leave your animals alone or your crops uncared for at home for a very long time. Trips to town were pretty rare. Why might you have needed to go to town? Normally, everyone in your family helped to make most of what you needed on your farm. But there were always a few things that your family couldn't make themselves, like some iron nails or a new pair of shoes, or that would have simply taken too much time to make at home, like grinding wheat into flour or making cloth for a new shirt. Fortunately, there were different kinds of tradespeople in town who were specialists or experts at many of these jobs that couldn't have been done at home or that took too long. How would you have paid these tradespeople for the things you needed? Farmers usually brought a load of goods to sell. People in colonial times did not use money as often as we do today. Or he might have bartered or exchanged some eggs or butter for the cloth you needed to make new clothes. If you bartered products that you brought from your farm, you swapped or traded what you brought for something that you wanted from that tradesperson. You would not pay money, you would trade. Trade means to exchange. You may have brought along some vegetables or even chickens to trade. The first stop on your trip to town, at least in a large town, most likely would have been at the town square. Most of the shops and important buildings were located in or around the town square. Unlike the country, buildings in town were close together, which made it possible for you to visit several shops on the same day. The town square was the place where the mayor and other town leaders made speeches or important announcements. The town square was also where townspeople met to talk and gossip with their friends. This was how people learned the latest news. From the town square, you probably headed to the nearby trading post or general store. This is where farmers could buy, sell, or trade all kinds of things. At the trading post or general store, you might have traded the vegetables, grains, or dairy products you brought with you for tools, cloth, or supplies that you needed. If you were visiting a typical town in colonial days, here is where your trip to town would end. Most smaller towns had only one general store, a place where farmers could trade their crops to get basic tools and supplies they could not make at home. However, let us imagine that you are visiting a very large town where you could see and do much more. If you looked near the river, you may have seen a mill, a building where wheat was ground or crushed between large stones to make large amounts of flour. Mills were almost always on the river because flowing water was needed to turn the huge water wheel that made the large, flat stones inside turn and grind the wheel. If you have visited the miller, no doubt you would have brought freshly harvested wheat or corn from your farm for the miller to grind into flour. Once it was ground into flour, you would have been able to take it home to bake bread, cakes, and other good things to eat. Next, you may have stopped in the baker's shop and bought freshly baked rolls and bread. What a treat for your family! If you were a rich farmer, you would have visited the hatter for a new hat, or the dressmaker to buy a new dress for your daughter. Instead of buying cloth, you may have just bought yourself a new shirt from the tailor. A tailor is a person who makes or fixes clothing. And you would have had to visit the all-important cobbler, who would have made you a new pair of strong leather shoes. The blacksmith was an important specialist in town, with his own set of tools and skills. The blacksmith built fires to melt iron so he could pound it into the horseshoes and nails that you needed. He also worked hard to make many of the same metal tools that you used back on your farm. In the busy town, each of the tradespeople and merchants had something special to offer people who lived in the country, just as you had much needed fresh food to offer them. For the next few days, you'll be learning more about some of these special people. The end. Now let's have a discussion. Why did farmers go into town? Where were trips rare instead of every day? What is the center of town called where people went to hear news and announcements? What could a farmer get from a cobbler? In your journal, write and draw about what trade or job you would have wanted to learn and why. Have these discussions with your family.